Okay, so let's dive into this story about this guy, Girolamo Savonarola.
Sounds intriguing.
Yeah, so picture this. It's like the late 1400s in Florence,
Yeah.
right? The Renaissance is in full swing, art, culture, intellectual thought. It's all booming.
Right.
But then you have this charismatic preacher, Savonarola, comes on the scene, and he starts denouncing all the excess, the luxury, the extravagance,
So he's like a countercultural figure in a way.
Yeah, exactly. He's calling for a return to piety, simplicity,
Hmm.
a more austere way of life.
Interesting.
And get this, he actually orchestrates this massive bonfire where people are like burning their luxurious possessions, their fancy clothes, books, even works of art, like as a sign of repentance.
Wow. That's intense. Talk about making a statement.
Yeah, it's pretty wild,
It
right?
sounds like something out of a movie.
It really does.
Yeah.
And that's what we're going to be digging into today. The story of Girolamo Savonarola.
Okay, I'm all ears.
So for this deep dive, we're tapping into this fantastic interview with Denise Miner. She's a historical novelist who recently published this book called Three Fires.
Three fires.
Yeah, it's all about Savonarola's life. And she just brings this whole era to life with so much detail and insight.
Cool. So what's her take on Savonarola? I mean, was he just a religious zealot or was there more to him?
Well, she really digs into that.
Yeah.
She paints him as this complex figure.
Yeah.
He was super critical of the Catholic Church, the corruption, the wealth, the power.
Right. The church was pretty much running the show back then.
Yeah. And he also went after the Medici family. They were like the super rich, powerful rulers of Florence at the time.
Ah, the Medici.
Yeah, they were huge patrons of the arts.
Yeah.
They basically funded the Renaissance, but Savonarola saw them as a symbol of decadence and corruption.
So he wasn't exactly winning any popularity contests with the elite.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
But his message, it really resonated with the working class,
Mm.
the people who were struggling economically and feeling left behind.
Makes sense. I mean, people are always drawn to those who promise change, especially when times are tough.
Exactly. And Miner, she draws these interesting parallels between Savonarola and like modern day populists.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the way he appealed to people's emotions, promised radical change, used prophecies to build his authority. It's like eerily familiar.
Wow, that's fascinating. So he was like a preacher, a politician, and a prophet all rolled into one.
Yeah, kind of. And Miner also gets into his personal life, too. She suggests that maybe a romantic rejection early on might have fueled some of his fire and brimstone.
No, heartbroken and then turned to religion. That's a classic story.
Right. But what I find really interesting is how she challenges the traditional historical narratives.
In what way?
Well, a lot of the sources from that time, they were written by men, and they
Yeah.
often portrayed women in a very specific way, either as like pious saints or temptresses.
I see.
So Miner, she questions the reliability of those sources. She's like, wait a minute. These women, they probably had more complex thoughts and motivations than these accounts give them credit for.
That makes sense. It's like she's trying to give a voice to those who were silenced or overlooked.
Exactly. So we have this ambitious young man, possibly heartbroken, becomes a preacher. But he's not content with just giving sermons. He wants to transform Florence to make it a shining example of moral purity.
So he was a reformer at heart.
Yeah, you can say that. And he spent years honing his preaching skills, developing this super captivating and emotionally charged style.
So he was a powerful speaker.
Oh, yeah. People were drawn to him. His sermons would move people to tears.
Literally.
Literally. His followers, they were nicknamed the Snivelers because they would cry so much during his sermons.
Wow. The Snifflers. That's quite a nickname.
Right?
It's interesting how powerful emotions can be in shaping people's beliefs.
Oh, absolutely. And Miner, she makes this fascinating point about how Savonarola's followers, they formed this really strong sense of shared identity. They saw themselves as the righteous ones, the chosen ones.
Right, kind of like an exclusive club.
Yeah, and she argues that this sense of identity, while it was unifying, it also created a barrier to dialogue and understanding with people who held different viewpoints.
Oh, I see. So they were so caught up in their own righteousness that they couldn't see beyond it.
Yeah, and it's something we see today too. People retreating into their own echo chambers, unwilling to listen to or engage with those who disagree with them.
Sadly, it's all too common these days.
Right. And then there were Savonarola's prophecies. He would predict things like famine, war, even the deaths of prominent figures. And get this, many of them actually came true.
No way. Really?
Yeah, it's pretty wild. It just fueled his popularity and cemented his authority in the eyes of many people.
Well, I can see how that would happen. If you're predicting the future and it's coming true, people are going to listen to you.
Right. And then, of course, there's the infamous bonfire of the vanities where people burned all those luxury items, works of art. It's really a striking image.
Definitely a moment that captures the whole Savonarola phenomenon.
Yeah, Miner describes it in detail, and she points out this interesting contrast between the first bonfire, which was full of genuine fervor, and the second one a year later, which was kind of subdued, almost obligatory.
So maybe the initial enthusiasm was starting to fade.
Maybe.
Oh.
But what's interesting is that even though Savonarola championed certain ideas that might have been considered progressive, like his concern for the poor, his criticism of the wealthy, his methods were ultimately oppressive.
So he was a paradox in a way, a reformer who became a tyrant.
Yeah. And that's where his unwavering conviction, the thing that initially drew people to him, ultimately led to his downfall.
How so?
Well, his refusal to compromise, his rejection of dialogue with those who disagreed, the zealotry of his followers, it created this climate of fear and intolerance in Florence.
So his own rigidity became his undoing.
Exactly. And Miner, she makes this really important point about the dangers of absolute certainty, regardless of the cause.
So it's not just about what you believe, but how you hold those beliefs.
Right. It's about being open to different perspectives, being willing to engage in thoughtful debate, even with those we disagree with.
It's a valuable lesson for our own time, wouldn't you say? Especially with all the polarization and echo chambers we see online.
Absolutely. We could all benefit from being a bit more open-minded, a little more willing to listen.
Absolutely.
So Savonarola's rise to power, it was fueled by this perfect storm of factors. You had famine, political instability, and then this charismatic leader promising answers and a return to moral purity.
Right, a classic recipe for upheaval.
And what's so interesting is that while Savonarola may have genuinely believed in his mission, Miner suggests that power gradually eroded his empathy.
That's often the case, isn't it? Power corrupts.
Yeah, it's like a classic tale of how even those with good intentions can be seduced by power and end up making choices that contradict their initial value.
It's a cautionary reminder for anyone in a position of authority.
For sure. So we see Savonarola, this complex figure, a mix of progressive ideas and troubling methods. And his story, it just continues to resonate centuries later.
It's a reminder that history is full of these fascinating characters and that their stories can teach us a lot about ourselves and the world we live in.
Exactly. And that's what makes this deep dive so compelling. It's not just about the past, it's about the present and the future, too.
Right,
So are we ready to dig a little deeper into Savonarola's story?
let's do it.
All right, so where do we go from here?
Well, one thing I'm really curious about is this event called the Trial by Fire.
Trial by fire?
Yeah, I mean, you can't get much more dramatic than that.
Okay, fill me in. What was that all about?
So basically, you had Savonarola's Dominican order and this rival Franciscan order.
Okay.
And they agreed to this showdown, this public spectacle, to prove whose teachings were true.
Like a spiritual duel.
Exactly. They were going to walk through a tunnel of fire. Whoever emerged unscathed would be declared the victor, proof that their beliefs were righteous.
Wow, talk about putting your faith on the line.
Right. But here's the twist. It didn't actually happen.
What do you mean?
Well, there were all these delays, and then a rainstorm hit, drenched the flames.
So no fiery showdown.
Nope. Miner suggests that Savonarola might have spun this as a miracle from his perspective.
Like divine intervention.
Exactly. What are the chances of a sudden downpour right when you're about to walk through fire?
His followers must have eaten that up.
Yeah, it probably just reinforced their belief in him, but, his luck eventually ran out.
Right, so what ultimately led to his downfall?
Well, his uncompromising nature, his attacks on the church, they definitely played a part.
So he pushed too far.
Yeah, he became too powerful, too critical, too much of a threat.
And what happened to him in the end?
Well, he was excommunicated by the Pope, accused of heresy, and ultimately sentenced to death.
Wow.
He was hanged and then burned in the same square where he had once held so much sway over the people of Florence.
That's a pretty dramatic end.
It is. It's a tragic story, but one that holds some really valuable lessons for us even today.
Like what?
Well, it shows us the dangers of unchecked power, the seductive nature of simplistic solutions, the importance of critical thinking and open dialogue.
Right, it's a reminder that we need to be careful about who we follow and what we believe.
Exactly. We need to be willing to question authority, to think for ourselves, to consider different perspectives.
So it's not just a historical account, but a warning about the fragility of democracy, the pitfalls of extremism, and the importance of informed engagement and healthy debate.
Precisely. And it highlights the fact that history is full of these surprising parallels to our own time, urging us to learn from the past and navigate our present with greater awareness.
This has been incredibly illuminating.
I agree. Savonarola's story is both fascinating and deeply relevant.
And what strikes me is how Miner manages to humanize him.
Oh, absolutely.
She doesn't shy away from his flaws, but she also gives us glimpses into his motivations and the complexities of his character.
Yeah, she makes him relatable, which makes his story even more compelling.
And she raises some thought-provoking questions about how we interpret history. Well, she challenges the idea of relying solely on traditional narratives, especially those crafted by the people in power.
Right. We need to consider multiple perspectives and be aware of the biases that might have shaped historical accounts.
Exactly. And she points out these recurring themes that echo throughout history. The allure of charismatic leaders, the
Mhm.
appeal of easy answers, the danger of groupthink.
It's like we haven't learned from our mistakes.
Maybe not as much as we should have.
But perhaps by studying history, we can start to recognize these patterns and break free from them.
I hope so. Anyway, back to Savonarola. So he was this complex mix of progressive ideals and troubling methods.
And his story, it's still relevant today.
For sure. What resonates with you the most?
I think it's the way Miner connects his story to our current political climate.
Oh, yeah. She definitely makes those connections.
It's scary how easily people can be swayed by fear and rhetoric, how quickly things can spiral out of control.
It's a reminder to be vigilant, to stay informed, and to think critically about the information we're consuming.
Absolutely. We can't just blindly follow anyone. We need to be discerning and question everything.
So what do you think Savonarola would make of our world today?
I don't know. It's hard to say.
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, he was a reformer. He wanted to change things. He was critical of the status quo.
Right.
But on the other hand, he was also very rigid in his beliefs, intolerant of dissent, and ultimately authoritarian in his method.
True. So maybe he'd be both horrified and intrigued by the complexities of our modern world.
Maybe he'd see it as a new battleground for his ideas.
It's definitely food for thought.
So before we wrap up, is there anything else about Savonarola that you find particularly fascinating?
Well, I'm still thinking about that trial by fire that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, that was pretty wild.
It's a great example of how Savonarola used spectacle and drama to build his authority.
Right, and how a bit of luck or maybe divine intervention could be spun to fit his narrative.
Exactly. And it makes me wonder about the role of chance and circumstance in shaping history.
Yeah, how sometimes things happen that are completely out of our control, and yet they can have a profound impact on the course of events.
It's like this constant interplay between human agency and the unpredictable nature of life.
Which makes history all the more fascinating to study.
Absolutely. It's a never-ending source of surprises and insights.
So what final thoughts would you leave our listeners with today?
I guess I'd say Savonarola's story is a reminder that history is full of complex characters and that there are always multiple sides to every story. It's important to be open-minded to question what we think we know and to be willing to see things from different perspectives.
That's a great takeaway. And if this deep dive has sparked your curiosity, I highly recommend checking out Denise Miner's book, Three Fires. It's a captivating read that will challenge your assumptions and leave you pondering the complexities of history and human nature.
Absolutely. It's a must-read for anyone interested in this period of history.
And don't forget to subscribe to The Deep Dive for more explorations of fascinating topics. We'll continue to bring you thought-provoking insights and compelling stories from the past, present, and future.
Join us next time as we take another deep dive into the world of ideas.
See you then.
So, Savonarola didn't shy away from a little drama.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there was this one event, the trial by fire.
Trial by fire. That sounds pretty intense.
Oh, it was basically a showdown between Savonarola's Dominican order and the rival Franciscan order.
Okay, so like a battle of the beliefs.
Exactly. It was meant to be this public spectacle, a test of faith to prove which side was right.
And how did that work?
Well, the idea was they would both walk through a tunnel of fire.
A tunnel of fire.
Yeah, whoever emerged unscathed, without any burns, would be declared the victor, proof that their teachings were true.
Wow, that's pretty extreme.
Oh yeah, high-stakes stuff. But here's the thing. It didn't actually happen.
It didn't.
No. There are all these delays, and then right before it's supposed to go down, a rainstorm hit.
A rainstorm.
Yeah, totally drenched the flames. So no trial by fire.
Huh? So what happened then?
Well, Miner points out that Savonarola could have easily spun this to his advantage.
How so?
I mean, what are the chances of a sudden downpour right when you're about to prove your divine connection?
Yeah, I guess it could be seen as a sign from above.
Exactly, a miracle in his favor. And it probably just solidified his authority in the eyes of his followers.
Makes sense. But we know it didn't last forever. So what ultimately brought Savonarola down?
Well, his attacks on the church definitely didn't help. He was becoming a real thorn in their side.
So he made some powerful enemies.
Oh, yeah. And his refusal to compromise, his unwavering conviction, that also contributed to his downfall.
How so?
Well, it alienated people. He wasn't interested in dialogue or debate. He just doubled down on his beliefs.
So it was his own rigidity that ultimately did him in.
Yeah, I think so. It's a reminder that even when you're fighting for what you believe in, it's important to be open to different perspectives.
To be willing to listen and learn from others.
Exactly. And Savonarola, he wasn't really interested in that.
So what was his fate?
Not good. He was excommunicated by the Pope, accused of heresy, and eventually sentenced to death.
Wow.
Yeah, he was hanged and then burned in the same square where he had once preached to his followers.
That's a pretty dramatic end.
It is a tragic fall from grace, but it's a story that still resonates with us today.
In what way?
Well, it shows us the dangers of unchecked power, the seductive nature of simple solutions, and the importance of critical thinking.
We need to be willing to question authority, to think for ourselves, to engage in thoughtful debate.
Exactly. We can't just blindly follow anyone. We need to be informed and discerning.
So Savonarola's story is a cautionary tale.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
A reminder that history is full of these surprising parallels to our own time and that we need to learn from the past.
It's like those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it.
Exactly.
Hmm.
We need to be aware of the patterns of human behavior, the things that lead to extremism and tyranny.
So we can avoid making the same mistakes.
Precisely. So what do you find most striking about Savonarola's story?
I think it's the way Minor manages to humanize him.
Oh, yeah.
She doesn't shy away from his flaws, but she also shows us his humanity, his struggles, his doubts.
It makes him a more relatable figure.
Yeah, and it makes his story all the more tragic.
I agree. And it reminds us that even those who do terrible things are still human beings with their own complex motivations.
It's a reminder to be compassionate, even when we disagree with someone,
To try to understand where they're coming from.
and to recognize that we all have the capacity for both good and evil.
Absolutely. So what are some of the key takeaways that you think our listeners should ponder?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to be aware of the power of rhetoric, how it can be used to manipulate and control people.
Oh, yeah. Savonarola was a master of that.
He knew how to tap into people's fears and desires, how to use language to create a sense of urgency and division.
And we see that happening all the time today.
In politics, in the media, on social media.
True.
So we need to be critical thinkers. We need to question the narratives that are being presented to us.
Exactly. Don't just take things at face value. Dig deeper. Look for evidence. Consider different perspectives.
And secondly, I think it's important to remember that history is full of these complex figures like Savonarola who defy easy categorization.
Yeah, he wasn't simply a villain or a hero. He was both and neither.
He was a product of his time, shaped by the forces around him.
And like all of us, he made choices, some good, some bad, that had far-reaching consequences.
So we need to be careful about judging the past by the standards of the present.
To try to understand the context in which people lived and made their decisions.
Because history is never black and white. It's full of shades of gray.
And that's what makes it so fascinating to study.
It's a constant reminder that there's always more to learn, always another layer to uncover.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to engage with history, to grapple with its complexities, to learn from its mistakes.
So we can create a better future.
Absolutely. So what are some of the things that you're still pondering about Savonarola's story?
Well, I'm still thinking about the role of faith and how it can be both a force for good and a source of division.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Savonarola clearly believed in what he was doing. He was convinced that he was on a mission from God.
But that conviction ultimately led him to commit terrible acts.
So it makes me wonder about the limits of faith, about where belief ends and fanaticism begins.
It's a tough question.
And it's one that we're still grappling with today,
Especially in our increasingly polarized world.
where people seem to be retreating into their own ideological bubbles.
Unwilling to listen to or even tolerate those who hold different beliefs.
So Savonarola's story is a warning about the dangers of intolerance, of allowing our beliefs to harden into dogma.
It's a reminder to be open-minded, to be willing to engage with those who disagree with us.
To seek out common ground and to build bridges instead of walls.
Because ultimately we're all in this together.
And we need to find ways to coexist peacefully even when we disagree.
Absolutely. So how do you think we can do that?
Well, I think it starts with education, with teaching people to think critically, to question authority, to be skeptical of easy answers.
Right. We need to equip people with the tools to navigate the complexities of our world
and to be resilient in the face of misinformation and propaganda.
because there's a lot of that out there these days.
Oh, yeah,
So we need to be savvy consumers of information
to double-check our sources, to be aware of our own biases,
and to be willing to change our minds when presented with new evidence.
because that's how we grow and learn.
It's how we become better informed and more engaged citizens.
And ultimately, it's how we create a more just and equitable society.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what are some resources that you would recommend for people who are interested in learning more about Savonarola and this period of history?
Well, of course, I highly recommend Denise Miner's book, Three Fires. It's a great starting point.
Agreed. And it's a really engaging read.
Yeah, she's a talented writer. She really brings the story to life.
And there are also some great documentaries and podcasts out there that explore this topic in more depth.
Yeah, I'll put some links to those in the show notes.
Great. So what are we going to explore next time on the deep dive?
Well, I'm thinking we could take a deep dive into the world of conspiracy theories.
Oh, that sounds intriguing.
Yeah, we could explore how they spread, why people believe them, and the impact they have on our society.
I'm in. Let's do it.
Awesome. So join us next time as we delve into the shadowy world of conspiracy theories.
It's going to be a wild ride.
See you then. You know, it's amazing how, even after all this time, Savonarola's story still has the power to make us think about faith, about power, about the choices that we make.
Yeah, it really does. And one thing that I keep coming back to is that tension between progress and resistance that we see in his story. I mean, think about it. He rejects the Renaissance. He tries to impose this really strict moral code on Florence.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if there's just like this part of human nature that's always drawn to certainty, even if it means sacrificing freedom and individual expression.
Right. Like, is there a point where the desire for order and control just becomes so strong that it ends up stifling creativity and critical thinking?
It's a scary thought. And
Yeah.
Savonarola's Florence, it feels like a cautionary tale in a way.
It definitely is. It shows what can happen when fear and dogma are allowed to dictate our actions.
Yeah, and it makes me think about how important it is to have those open dialogues and debates,
Yeah,
as a way to work through uncertainty and arrive at more nuanced perspectives.
absolutely. I mean, a society that shuts down dissent, a society that silences opposing viewpoints, it risks becoming stagnant and ultimately vulnerable to those who exploit fear and division for their own gain.
That's a really good point.
Right.
And it seems like Miner's really urging us to be more discerning, about the information that we consume, to question the narratives that we're presented with, and to really engage in thoughtful discourse, even with people that we disagree with.
Exactly. I mean, true understanding comes from grappling with complexity and being willing to challenge our own preconceived notions.
One of the things that I found really interesting in Three Fires was how Miner wove in that concept of choice.
Yeah.
Even amidst all the chaos and upheaval of that time, she emphasizes that individuals still had agency. They made choices that shaped their destinies and ultimately contributed to the course of history.
Right. It's like even when it feels like the world is spinning out of control, we still have the power to make decisions that impact not just our own lives, but the lives of those around her.
Exactly. And those choices, they matter. They have consequences that ripple outward, influencing others and shaping the kind of society that we create.
It's both empowering and a little bit daunting, isn't it?
It is. It's a call to be responsible, to really think about the choices that we make and the potential impact that they might have.
And it suggests that history isn't just something that happened to other people, in the past. It's something that we're all participating in right now.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of Girolamo Savonarola, what final thoughts would you leave our listeners with? What can we learn from his fiery rise and fall that might help us navigate the complexities of our own time?
Well, Savonarola's story, it reminds us that the allure of certainty, the allure of simple solutions, it can be really, really seductive, especially in times of turmoil and uncertainty. But it's precisely in those moments that we need to be the most vigilant about clinging to our values, embracing critical thinking, engaging in respectful dialogue with the people who hold different perspectives. I think we should all strive to be more like those citizens of Florence who questioned Savonarola's authority, who dared to dissent, and who ultimately helped to restore balance to their city.
That's a powerful message, and one that feels incredibly relevant right now. So if this deep dive has piqued your interest, be sure to check out Denise Miner's book, Three Fires. It's a truly captivating read that will challenge your assumptions and leave you contemplating the complexities of history and human nature.
And don't forget to subscribe to The Deep Dive for more explorations of fascinating topics. We'll continue to bring you thought-provoking insights and compelling stories from the past, present, and future.
Join us next time as we take another deep dive into the world of ideas and uncover the hidden connections that shape our understanding of ourselves and the world around us.